Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode here of the Lonely Risk Podcast. I am your host, as always, Blake Ray. And not only have we had so many incredible people on the show, but today we are hosting yet another amazing watch brand. Today's guest is not somebody who built a watch brand, but somebody who helped to bring one back to life. The brand we have today is none other than Raketa, which is one of the most storied watch brands and born out of the Petrodorets, butchered the hell out of that, watch factory, who's been making timepieces for over a century. The modern Raketa is not only a fully in-house manufacturer, building its own movements and assembling on site, but it's also staking its claim with modern and bold design language. Today, we are sitting down with the man who took the leap to purchase and revive Raketa, turning a fading legend into a working, evolving watchmaker again. We're going to cover what it really means to inherit legacy and how you modernize it without erasing the brand's identity, and also what it takes to run a historic watch factory in today's market, and why, of course, you collectors should be paying attention to what Raketa is doing. Everybody, please welcome the man behind the brand, David Henderson-Stewart.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. No, thank you for coming on. This has been one that I think it's been about a year or so since we've met, or maybe less.
We met in April last year. We met at Watch and Wonders, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. So
in Geneva.
So yeah, it's been quite a while. And something that like really kind of gravitated me to you is, first of all, like, you're not traditional in the other sense of other watchmakers who are essentially just really design forward. They're working on just putting their products together, using third parties, things of that nature. But you guys are actually like the real deal. Like, you have your own movement, you have, your own factory, like you have much more strategic challenges than other watchmakers, and that was something that really stuck out to me. And I think we talked about, and something that I loved to hear you say, like when we talked, was, you talked a lot about like stories. Like, you just kept saying the word story over and over and over and over. Not that that's a bad thing, but I loved it that you actually get it. You get that people connect to stories and not necessarily products as much as they do stories.
I mean, you've just listed every single reason why I started Raketa. I'm not a watchmaker at all. I used to be a lawyer in a US law firm. And just out of opportunity, I moved to Russia because they offered me a good position. And then I discovered the Raketa watch factory just by pure chance. And the reason I took it over are exactly all the reasons you listed. This incredible manufacturer, they make their own mechanical movements, including the most difficult components, which are the hairspring, the balance wheel, all of the escapements. The design is really cool, and the storytelling amazing. When I am in Geneva Watch Days or in Watch and Wonders, or I was lately in Dubai Watch Week, it's amazing. Every watch, I tell stories, as you said, all the time. And this is something that really makes us stand apart from many other brands, is that every single watch that we do has an incredible, authentic story to tell. And I could talk about every single of our watches for at least 10 minutes. And I believe that I did that with you. And this is something that makes us really different. And for all of these reasons, basically, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it was just lying on the floor, it was dying. Every single old watch Soviet factory just died. They didn't survive this difficult transition period from the Soviet communist era to the modern capitalistic era. And Raketa was basically dying, and I just, picked it up.
And it's crazy to see, like, obviously, like, I have a couple Soviet watches in my collection. I have a Russian wife, but, Raketa is a brand that, like, most watch collectors already know. So because of the history, because of the lineage. Like now you're just going through the process of kind of modernizing it and showing people like, hey, we're going into a new direction.
It was huge in the Soviet times. It was there were more than 7,000 watchmakers. They produced more than 6 million mechanical watches every year, and they exported a lot of watches. The Soviet Union needed currency, hard currency. They needed dollars, and so they exported a lot of watches. So there are a lot of watches on the market. There are still a lot of collectors of Soviet watches all around the world. And the designs are really quirky. I mean, Russian Soviet design is very often different from what you can find in Switzerland. And that's also one of the reasons I thought, wow, this is so cool. Yeah. And all of the designs that I showed you when we met in Geneva, we didn't invent them. These are old Soviet designs. We were just inspired by these old Soviet designs. Obviously, we completely redesigned them, but the inspiration is still there.
Something too that like really kind of stuck out to me is like, I think you also understand that like the people that work at the brand are also the face of the brand, and I remember you have like a stack of business cards and like, I think I took 2, and then there was one person, like one of your employees on the back of one, and then another employee on the back of the other. And like, people who have been at the factory for, ages, it sounded like.
Actually, it's not a business card. It's, we cherish and we respect and we value so much our specialists, our watchmakers, because, I come from a system, you come from the same system, the Western system, where, if you're not a banker, consultant, a lawyer, these professions are very highly valued, but if you're just a simple worker in a factory, you are at the bottom of the social structure. But what I discovered with Raketa is that these workers, these specialists that we have are so much more important than even I am. They do incredible things with their hands. They produce these incredible small little components that are then assembled into a watch, and then the watch has to work. What they do is so much more difficult than what I did as a lawyer, as a corporate lawyer. So we really value these people, and in every single box that's a watch box, we randomly put a photo of one of our watchmakers, and at the back of the photo we give his name and what component he produced in your watch. So it really gives a human touch to the watch, and people actually love it. People collect these photos. So we invited quite a well-known, actually British photographer. He's called James Hill, Hill, and he took a photo of every single one of our workers, and so people collect these photos now.
So cool. That is so cool. Like, I love that. I think it starts.
But once again, the reason we do that is not just because it's cool to do it. It's just because we really value these people. Without them, we would not exist. They produce our watches, our mechanical movements, and they have an incredible know-how, which very few people in the world have. There are very few brands that can produce their own, for example, hairspring. It's a very rare, difficult operation. And we've invited over the past 10 years so many watch bloggers, watch journalists, mainly from Europe and the Middle East. And a lot of them said, we never saw these operations in Switzerland because Rolex would never either let you in, or if they do let you in, they will just show you how they assemble, but they'll never show you how they produce a hairspring, for example. And we show it. So these people are just incredible. And so we try to put them forward as much as we can.
Yeah, especially I've toured a lot of watch manufacturers, and some of them are like really proud about like stamping, right? Like, because they're such small parts, and it's like, it's much easier for somebody to outsource those parts and get them in than it is for you to actually stamp them. So, some brands are so proud that they're doing their own stamping, Hairsprings is, the biggest supplier of hairsprings for the longest time was actually Breguet. They sold hairsprings to everybody. And now, it is something that they buy right off the shelf. There's no point to produce their own hairsprings, but it's insane that you guys are doing that.
One of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed, it was very badly organized. Its economy was completely centralized, and every manufacturer produced everything in-house, which is really not really rational.
Wow.
It's not a very efficient system, and that's one of the reasons why the system collapsed, I think. It's much more efficient to work as in Switzerland, where you have a network of ultra specialized suppliers. But things are as they are, and so we inherited a manufacturer which, under its own roof, produced everything, but it was dying. So we had to take difficult choices. What do we continue doing? What do we, discontinue doing? And we just buy. So we continue producing approximately 80% of the components that I wear on my watch, which is quite amazing. And out of these, the biggest part is the mechanical movement. We still produce 100% of our mechanical movements. And it's not just, I didn't want that. It's just we inherited that technology. And the specialists and the machines and the raw material and the technical drawings, the technical process. So they already did that when I discovered the manufacture. And it's a miracle that the manufacturer didn't collapse before, because the Soviet Union had approximately, I think, 10 watch manufacturers, very big watch manufacturers, and nearly all of them collapsed. Nearly all of them went bankrupt.
That's crazy. So I'm curious as to, you, corporate lawyer, living in Russia, how did you find out about Raketa? And then where did you consciously say, this is something that I want to do, or something that I want to invest my energy into?
Well, as I said, I started as a corporate lawyer in a US law firm in Europe. And then
Right.
one of our clients was a Russian oligarch, as you call them, and
Okay.
he offered me to join his group in Russia. So that's why I left the law firm and I moved to Russia and I started working for him. And then eventually I got bored of working for this big Russian group, but I really liked the country, and I said, I have a choice: either I go back to Europe and I become again a lawyer, working difficult hours, day and night, weekends included, as people work in US law firms, or I stay a bit longer in Russia. And just to this, working for this Russian guy, I worked so much also that I hardly had the time to visit the country. It's a big country, very rich culture, very incredible, museums, geography, landscape, art. And people are very nice. And so I decided to stay a bit longer, but I didn't want to work in a group anymore. I want to do something for myself. And I was always surprised that a country with such an incredible culture, such a fantastic history, and didn't have any brands. And I thought, this country should have really brands, because very, very often, big brands are based on culture, legacy, history, traditions, and Russia has all of that. Didn't have any brands. And I started looking for some brands. I didn't look into watches particularly, but everyone pointed me in the direction of watches. Everyone said, actually, by the way, I knew nothing about watches. I never wore a watch. I knew absolutely nothing about watches, but everyone said, you should look into the direction of Soviet brands, because Soviet brands are really cool. They're quite famous worldwide, and maybe there's still something that exists. And I thought that's really cool. I started looking around and I discovered Raketa. And wow. I did a little, the whole thing is completely crazy. I knew nothing about production, obviously, but I thought, well, at that point of time, I kind of understood that it was quite cool to have its own manufacturer. I understood that. I did a bit of research. I spoke to a few people, and everyone said, no one has manufacturers anymore, apart from, Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet. And so first I discovered they still had their own manufacturer. I thought this is really cool. Then I started looking up their designs, and they had really quirky designs, with counterclockwise, triangular hands, 24 hours. And I thought that's really, really cool. And they also had this incredible history. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I didn't really buy it. I just picked it up. It was kind of dying. You should try to imagine yourself, go back into the past 15 years ago. No one would have invested a dime into Russian watch brands. And I had this kind of irrational vision that there's no reason why a Russian watch brand should not becoming interesting, and maybe as interesting as Swiss brands, because they have the manufacture, the design, the history, the values, but I was very naive, obviously, at that time. I mean, if I knew how difficult it would be, I would never have started.
Well, no, I appreciate your honesty, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure you probably ran into a lot of weird little things, especially the watch industry. In the watch community, like, we are like picky, like we're geeky, like, obviously, like, you talked about how it just kind of like, it seems like, you just kind of landed in your lap is kind of the way that I took, your words now. But like, even acquiring the IP and acquiring the factory and like, that all probably had to be incredibly difficult and challenging work,
Well,
like, I'm sure
no,
with that.
The process of actually buying the company was quite easy. But I mean, my audit of the production of the factory was very limited. I just walked around the factory. I saw that machines were running, and I saw that they were assembling mechanical movements, and I saw that the hands turned around the dial and the watches, did tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And I said, wow, this is really cool. The production works perfectly well. I'll just do a bit of marketing, and I'll become very successful worldwide. Obviously, things turned out to be like 1 billion times more difficult. Obviously, the most difficult thing was the production. I completely underestimated how difficult it would be to modernize this Soviet old school factory. Especially that I knew nothing about it. I had no idea how to start the whole thing. And obviously I completely underestimated how much no one wanted Russian watches at that time. And first and foremost, the Russians themselves. It was a time when Russians were a bit ashamed of their country, and all the Russian guys wanted to move to the West. All the Russian girls wanted to marry. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but everyone.
Right.
It was a time when the Russians really looked up to the West and were kind of really ashamed of their country. So they certainly didn't want to buy Russian watches. And basically, the market for Russian watches were basically tourists coming to visit Russia. And as a tourist, you always want to buy a souvenir. And there was nothing much to buy except for Russian fur hats and the Russian Matryoshki dolls and Soviet watches.
Yeah.
So really, that was the market. And so, but I was extreme naive. But the idea was really cool. So basically, what drove me was this incredible idea that there's really something we can do out of it. There's no reason. We have the manufacture, we have the incredible design, the history. I mean, this is incredible. It's like a gem that's just lying on the floor. It's dirty, it's ugly. No one pays attention to it. I just picked it up and I've started, cleaning it up.
It's so cool. Something too that like, so I'm curious. It brings up the question, and then I have another follow up. But it's transitioning. You talked about modernizing the manufacturer. Like, how did you even like start that process? How did you look for inefficiencies when you don't even know what to look for?
Well, I mean, as everyone else, I thought that I wouldn't trust the Russians, the guys at the manufacturer, to tell me how to modernize it, because I thought only the Swiss know how to properly produce watches. So I flew to Switzerland and I started looking for consultants, someone who could advise me what to do. And that was very difficult because no one took me seriously when I said, I have my own manufacturer in St. Petersburg. They said, come on, it's impossible. No one has his own manufacturer. And then eventually I found some consultants and they came over, and I mean, to make it really short, they basically said, you have to throw all of your Soviet machines, buy a super expensive Swiss modern machines, CNC machines. But that was too expensive. I didn't have that money. Every CNC machine is like $500,000 or $1 million. And that was one problem. Second problem is all of my guys in Russia, they didn't know how, they did not know how to operate CNC machines. And so I ended up saying, what should I do now? And eventually I had a choice either to shut down the manufacture and do as many other brands just by like the movements in Switzerland or the rest kind of in India or China, and just to keep like a little atelier open to pretend that I do something. Or I could choose the difficult path, is to keep the manufacture and try to, based on the existing machines, the existing know-how, the existing technical process, try to gradually, step by step, modernize it. And that's what I did. And today, 90% of our machines are still Soviet machines. And what at first seems to be a disadvantage, a liability, has become like a really big asset now in terms of, because we still produce old school. It's a very old school production process where we set the machine by hand, you operate it by hand. It's a really semi-manual production. And we've invited so many bloggers and Swiss journalists and specialists to come and visit our manufacturer, and they all said, wow, you still produce watches like we produced watches in Switzerland 60 years ago, and please don't change anything because this is really unique. This is a really old school production, and this is one of the things that our community really appreciates and likes about Raketa, is that we're not only just a manufacturer, but it's manufactured old school, it's semi-manual, and anything that is done by hands, as you know, is more precious than something that is done by a machine.
Yeah. So something too that kind of brings this up, or perfectly segues, is I think in the watch community, watch collectors kind of have this stigma that Russian watches are like, and you look at other Russian watches out there, right? I'm not going to say names, but generally they're cheap. They're generally unreliable, right? And, you buy them, you wear them for 2 years, and when they break, you just throw them away. That is not a Raketa watch. Like, you're doing the exact opposite.
Well, I mean, the vision from the very first day was there's absolutely no reason why Raketa could not be at the same positioning as a Swiss brand. The mechanical movement that we have is perfect. The construction is very reliable. It was just a question of relearning how to produce every component exactly in conformity with the technical drawings and to assemble it in the best conditions. So that's what we did, and the vision from day one was to reach Swiss quality, not just in functionality, but also in design, marketing, and everything else. So we did a very difficult job, actually, of whilst keeping this old school production process. We kind of we did the best that we could, and we still do the best that we can to produce every single component exactly in conformity with technical drawings and to assemble the whole thing, in the perfect conditions. So the quality of our watches now is completely up to standards, completely up to Swiss standards.
They're amazing watches.
And that's basically one of the reasons why, despite the whole situation, we are still invited in the most prestigious watch exhibitions all around the world, is because Raketa is recognized, is acknowledged as a very serious, reputable brand, a premium brand, in terms of marketing, design, quality, and so on and so on. Otherwise, we would not be invited.
Yeah.
And actually, very often, Raketa price-wise is at a very attractive price point. And very often we are one of the first entry prices in all of these big watch exhibitions where you have all the biggest brands. But in position-wise, they acknowledge that we are at the same level, you see? because we are, as you know, as I'm not going to name any other brands, but we have an incredible history, manufacture our own, like we produce our own, you will not find a mechanical movement anywhere else. You know, we are like Rolex, we produce our own mechanical movements for our own brand. This is really, really unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy just your story and to hear this. And something too that probably you had to deal with and maybe you've never talked about is, you know, putting yourself in the shoes of your watchmakers, right? This foreign investor guys coming in, trying to change the brand, a lot of uncertainty. Like how did you get in there and modernize the brand without breaking the soul that like was already there?
Well, I mean, first of all, I very quickly understood that they did like magic with their hands. They produced like, actually, just to go back, when I realized that I couldn't afford buying Swiss machines and that I decided to keep the Soviet machines and try to build on that, when all my family went on holiday during the summer holiday to Europe, I stayed for 2 months and I lived in the manufacturer, a bit like, I mean, without any, a bit like Elon Musk and Tesla. I mean, every time I hear Elon Musk saying, you know, I sleep at the factory, that's exactly what I did. I worked at the factory. I worked behind every single machine. I did myself every single operation to try to understand what's wrong with this machine. And very often, nothing was wrong with the machine itself. Something was wrong with, you know, the temperature, the environment, the humidity, the raw material that they used, the cutting instruments, and so on, so on. Actually, I forgot what was the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, like how did you step in? You know, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
And one of the first, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. And so I lived with the specialists, and I started really valuing them. I really understood that these guys did an incredible job, and they produced magic with their own hands. So I respected them from day one. And when I kind of understood that I couldn't go into the direction that the Swiss consultants told me to go, buying Swiss machines, then I didn't have any other choice than to work hand in hand with the Russian guys, the Russian specialists, because I knew nothing about watchmaking. So I had to learn how to trust them. And that's what I did. And it took me some time to be accepted, obviously, because especially at the beginning, most of these specialist watchmakers were very old people, obviously. And, as any old person, for them, what was in the past will always be better than the present. And there was this kind of mentality that, okay, David's trying to do something, but anyways, it'll never be as good as it used to be in the Soviet times. And it's kind of normal. Every old person is like that. But very gradually, we started hiring young people. We opened our own watchmaking school because there are no more watchmaking schools in Russia. And very gradually, they started seeing results, and they started seeing that watches were being sold, not only in Russia, but worldwide. And step by step, they started seeing, wow, maybe there is a future for this manufacture.
Wow.
But it was difficult. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
But obviously, I'm just making it really short, but I went through very difficult times, and it required a lot of determination. I mean, there were 100 very good reasons every single year for the first 6 years why I should just shut down the whole manufacturer and just buy Swiss movements and just pretend that they're Russian made, just tweak them around, add a bit of, maybe a complication, change the decoration and just pretend it's Russian made. But I didn't like this direction because it was fake. And I really understood that as you said correctly, the soul of the project for Raketa was the manufacturer. It was our legitimacy. And that's what people really valued and cherished in Raketa, is that it's really authentic. When we say it's Russian made and it has its own mechanical movement, it's really Russian made with its own mechanical movement.
Did you have any resistance from, I mean, obviously you have these artisan, watchmakers, legacy crafts people who have been in the same conditions, the same factory, under the same leadership for so long. Like, how did you get the buy-in and support from these people? Okay, this British lawyer is coming in to take over our company. Like, like, how did you legitimize yourself to your staff? Did you ever have any resistance or like?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of difficulties that I had is there were two kind of difficulties. During the first 3-4 years, I was completely dependent on these old watchmakers. When I say old, it's 70 plus, because all the young ones had left. So it took me some time to find young people, and all of these young people were untrained, so we had to train them. So I completely relied on these old people, and whenever I told them, listen, we'll work a bit differently now. I mean, I came from a capitalistic system where, I required efficiency, I required long hours, I had a business plan, I required, results, targets. None of that works. That was one of the reasons I said, I'll just shut it down, because they kind of lived in the past. And I thought, and I was completely incapable of bringing this manufacturer into the management system that I was taught, in these law firms and so on, efficiency, productivity, targets, results. And I had to adapt to, they had a very slow pace of doing things. In my first business plan, new models had to come out every 2 months. Today, do you know how long it takes to release a model? A year and a half, 2 years. A year and a half, 2 years. And it's not just me, it's every single brand that I know in Switzerland.
Brand.
It takes them between the idea and the release, a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes even more. And the reason for that is watchmaking is incredibly difficult. The tolerances that we use to produce our components are sometimes a micron. A micron is, you take a millimeter, you divide it by 1,000, that's a micron. So, and it's incredibly difficult, and they have to reach these tolerances, with a semi-manual production. So watchmaking is extremely difficult. So I had to adapt to that slow pace of time, literally, and I started respecting them because, as I said, they did incredible things. I very quickly understood that producing mechanical movements is an incredible achievement, and they did it every single day. So I started listening to them, and I started listening to their advices, and very gradually, step by step, we did some progress.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, which makes it even more impressive that you guys are still doing things the old school way. You're not bringing in these crazy automated computer CNCs that like you can just literally dial down to those microns, which is absolutely crazy. This is a question for the watch nerds, but now that you're in the watch industry, like how has your relationship with watches kind of changed from, not only just being like an outsider, but I mean, do you consider yourself as a watch enthusiast now, or do you just, I'm just a guy just trying to run a watch brand?
I do, but I'm kind of special. I'm kind of apart from many people I meet in Switzerland, is that I never wore another watch than Raketa. I never wore watches before Raketa. And since I've started Raketa, obviously I never wore a single other watch. So all of my knowledge of watchmaking came from Raketa. Obviously, I didn't have any particular feelings towards watches when I started. I just thought the idea was cool. But very gradually, I discovered that watches are a very sacred, and I'm not ashamed of using that word, a sacred product, because it's linked to time. Time is one of the most sacred things that we have in life. Our ancestors read time. The dial of our ancestors was basically the sky, and time came from them. When they looked at the movement of the planets, the stars, the moon, the sun, and they believed that all of this was given to them by God. So there was something really sacred about it. And a watch literally gives you time, gives you the most important things I have in life. And that I also discovered that, all of the things that we use in our day-to-day life, most likely we will lose them, sell them, break them. But even the cheapest watch, even when it breaks down, like a quartz watch, I don't think that anyone throws it away in a dustbin. You don't throw a watch in a dustbin. Why? Because it's something to do with time, and as Patek Philippe really rightly says in that slogan, very often the watch is the only thing that you give to the next generation.
Yeah.
So there's something very special about watches that I gradually discovered. And that was actually one of the reasons that prevented me from shutting down this manufacturer, is because a manufacturer that produces watches is basically produces an instrument that gives you time. It produces time. There's something very special about it. So I have a lot of respect for watches now.
Yeah, I'm curious too. You just mentioned, like, so you have this Raketa way, if that's what we're gonna call it, and now you're modernizing the company, the manufacturer, and you're teaching these like newer watchmakers, like the old traditional ways. Like, what would you say is like the most challenging skill that you've seen to pass from generation to generation, within your manufacturer?
The most difficult challenge that I've had was to persuade younger generations to join the manufacturer. Because first of all, they came without any knowledge. It's not like in Switzerland, these manufacturers, they hire people who went through watchmaking schools, so they have the basic knowledge already. In our case, I just hired people that came from, other professions or without any profession, and we had to teach them the science of watchmaking. That was incredibly difficult because to become a, very highly qualified watchmaker, you need at least 5-6 years. Very, very difficult. So it was a big challenge to persuade young people to come to us and to learn a profession that no one else in Russia really would use. So if we went bankrupt or if we fired them for any reason, no one else would need the qualification that it would take them so long to get in Raketa. That was very, very difficult. In terms of what operations are the most difficult, they're all very difficult. I mean, I wouldn't say the hairspring is more difficult. Produced the hairspring, like in Switzerland, everyone says, "Oh, the hairspring is like the most difficult component." It isn't really. When you know how to do it, when you have all the technical process, the machines, and the raw material actually is like gold. It's very difficult to get. Either you have it or not, basically. We have 80 kilos of raw material to make the hairspring, so that's enough for the next 200 years.
Wow.
But making the hairspring is not more difficult than any other operation. Basically, the other thing that was difficult with the younger generations, all the young generations come from this, modern world where TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, everything has to be quick. And being a watchmaker requires a lot of patience, a lot of focus, all of these qualities that don't really exist in our modern world. So that was a big challenge, I would say.
Yeah, something too, like, obviously, gonna step back here. I jump around so much on my podcast, but I think it keeps the conversation interesting. You sat down in these roles at every, you said that you sat down at every single machine in your manufacturer. You sat down all these roles. You slept at the manufacturer, which is crazy. What do you feel like is the most human step at your factory? Like the most, maybe you can call it romantic or, but human, right? That you will never, ever, ever, ever look to automate.
But that's a difficult question because there's a lot of humanity in the manufacture because you have all of these incredible people doing incredible jobs with their hands. They all work with their hands. This is something that is very important in Raketa. It's a handcraft job. And the whole thing is extraordinary. All of these people are amazing, and they're all very important because every single component is important. Even if, like in the watch, I'm wearing on my wrist approximately 300 components. Every single component is important. Even if there's just one single little screw that's missing, we will not be able to assemble the watch. And there's not a single professional specialist that is less important than anyone else. Even someone who's working in the department that is, cleaning the components, because they have to be very clean before.
Sure.
One would think, that's his easy job. It's not so important. It's not. It's very important, because even the most minute dirt has to go away. And I don't know if I really answered your question, but
it sounds like none of it. Like, it sounds like obviously as technology advances, you have to at some point probably, or maybe not in your case, advance the manufacturer.
No. I mean, obviously, very gradually, we will bring in some modern machines. I mean, now obviously it's a bit difficult because of the geopolitical situation for us to buy machines from outside Russia, but eventually we will start buying modern machines. But we have 400 machines. Like, we've counted every single one of them, from the biggest to the smallest. We have 400, so it'll take a lot of time before we. Actually, one of the biggest advantages that we still use these old Soviet machines is that they don't have any software, so we don't depend on software upgrades, for example. They're very simple to operate. In 100 years, they will still be working because they're so simple. So on the one hand, we rely. The difficulty is that to operate, you need to be very highly qualified specialists who know how to set them and to operate them. But on the other hand, the machine itself is unbreakable. In 100 years, every single one of our machines will still be working, because there's no electrical system, there's no hydraulics, there's no software.
It's crazy. It's insane. I want to talk about design, because when you think of a Raketa watch, like design, we've already talked about the artisanal craftsman, like high quality, like products that you guys are putting out, but design is what sticks out. And Raketa literally just translates to like rocket,
a space rocket.
Yeah. Like, how does that space age kind of like symbolism, shape the creative direction of the brand?
Yeah. So the brand was created in 1961 when the first man flew into space. That was Yuri Gagarin. He was a Russian astronaut, or cosmonaut, as they called him in Russia.
One of the most famous too, right?
I mean, he was the very first guy in space. So
yeah.
And that was such an incredible event for humanity that the Soviets decided to create a brand in honor of his flight in 61. So they created the Raketa brand, which literally means a space rocket. And so in the DNA of the brand, space is obviously very, very important. So we have quite a lot of watches that are linked or inspired by space, because it's so important. And once again, we didn't invent these designs; they already existed. But design, that was a big challenge, obviously, because it took us some time because at the beginning, when I started Raketa, the Russians, as I said, they wanted Swiss watches, so they wanted Swiss design. The tourists, they wanted, Russian kitsch design. They wanted, the Soviet star, they wanted balalaikis, they wanted some. Basically, I had two markets. I had the foreign market and the Russian market that saw the brand completely differently. The Russians, they wanted Swiss design. The foreigners, they wanted some kind of Russian kitsch design. And it took me a lot of time to find the thin line that would be good for foreigners and Russians. And that was very difficult. But basically, every single watch that we have now we don't have any normal watches. If you went through our collection, if you remember, we didn't have any normal watches. All of our watches are really quirky. And all of these designs are completely inspired from Soviet designs. It's the big 0, instead of the 12 at the top of the dial, it's 24 hours instead of 12 hours, it's counterclockwise, it's and so on, so on, so on. We don't have any normal watches. And that's what really sets us apart from, and that was really the vision from the very beginning. I did not want to copy Swiss design, because I thought that's completely uninteresting. They do Swiss designs much better than we do. And we have to remain, we have to keep they did such incredible things in the past that we have to keep this tradition. So we have incredible design, yeah. And all of this design is not just design for the sake of design. It's very often design based on a storytelling. 24 hours is not just, oh, wow, it's cool to do a 24-hour dial. No, they did 24-hour dials because people working in extreme conditions with very difficult professions, like in the North Pole, South Pole,
I read that.
Submarines or in space, they need to survive a watch to distinguish day from night. So that's why they need 24-hour watches to survive. So it's not just a fancy watch with a 24-hour dial, it's actually a real tool watch. So it's a complication that serves a real functional purpose.
Yeah, I read that, because obviously where there's, there's not the same solar calendar or solar rotations that we live on, where people have no idea if it's going to be day or night.
Well, actually, it's more interesting than that. Is a normal 12-hour dial will say like it's 3 o'clock, right? But it doesn't say, is it 3 o'clock in the morning or at night?
Yeah, PM.
To know if it's AM or PM, you have to look through the window. If it's nighttime, if it's dark, okay, it's 3 AM. If it's light outside, it's 3 PM. That's how you understand it. But if you're in a submarine or in space or in the South Pole, you can't just look through the window. And where in your submarine, there's actually no window. So you need a 24-hour dial. So if it's 3 PM, the hour hand will be pointing towards 15. And it's 3 AM, it will be pointing towards 3.
Also in space. Yeah, amazing.
Same in space. Yeah. Because if you live in the ISS, in the space station, you orbit around the Earth 16 times every 24 hours. So you're completely confused. You can't look through the little window to see if it's day or night. So you need a 24-hour watch.
It was my understanding when I was doing research for this podcast that, obviously you talked about the 24-hour dial, beautiful watch, and, the Arctic expeditions that kind of like were the inspiration behind producing this tool, and then it was also my understanding, that the challenge became making a movement that can withstand like the harsh like conditions of Antarctica. Did I understand that correctly? Or
exactly. And all of our tool watches are not just, as I said, fancy tool watches. They're actually worn by submariners. As we speak now, they are worn by Russian astronauts in the ISS at this very minute. As you correctly said, Russian scientists living in the South Pole in very harsh conditions, they wear our watches, and they sent us films and videos and messages saying that our watch withstands, temperatures going down to minus 60 degrees. We have videos showing that they still continue working. They actually did an experiment where they put our watch in a glass of in a can of water, and it froze, and they kept it like for 3 hours outside by minus 40 degrees in the South Pole. Then they took it back into the station, they broke the ice, and the watch started working again. And we have this video. because the Raketa movement is very robust. Anything that the Soviets did was very robust.
You should use that in your marketing. Like that right there is a marketing gold mine.
Yeah. Actually, we should,
Yeah. Get on it. Yeah, I mean, it's such a storied brand, I guess the challenge becomes like, how do you balance the nostalgia, that you live in every day,
Well, we are completely, we are true to the past, and every single watch is based on this design, but it's a modern watch. We look towards the future, and the watch are completely up to standard in terms of quality, design, marketing, the modern standards. And there's no nostalgia in our design, you see. When you look at the watches, they're completely modern. You wouldn't see any nostalgia in our designs, in the colors that we use. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a completely modern watch.
It definitely expresses that.
Russian astronauts wear our watches in space, so they would not wear them if they were just watches, just retro watches, small manual movements, small case, plastic, glass.
Acrylic,
yeah.
Watches are really modernized, especially within the past 30 years, 35 years. Like you see a lot of collectors that are really into vintage pieces, but owning a vintage watch and taking care of a vintage watch is another challenge that us watch collectors face. Curious, and you kind of touched on this very briefly, but I got the idea that communicating that, like, hey, in Russia we take watchmaking seriously at Raketa, like, how do you communicate that?
Well, actually in Russia, apart from Raketa, you have Chaikin. Chaikin is quite famous.
Oh yeah.
You have Anton Sukhanov. Russia has a very strong history of watchmaking, very, very strong history. For many, many reasons. Obviously, there are very few of us left in Russia making watches. But historically speaking, there was a lot. And our marketing is very traditional, by the way. We use lots of social media. Before, up to 3 years ago, we did a lot of press tours. A lot of journalists, bloggers, people came to visit our manufacture, which is in St. Petersburg, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. St. Petersburg is a city, it's a bit like Venice. It's a city built on the sea. So there are a lot of canals, very beautiful city. So we communicate. Obviously, communicating now for us is a bit more challenging in the West, but we still sell all over the world because we don't touch politics. We just do, very nice mechanical watches. So we don't have any particular problem now, and people really appreciate the craftsmanship, the history, the manufacturing side, the storytelling, the design. And if you look at our content, the content that we do is, lots of people say you do really good content. We do films, really good photos. Every year we try to do better than the previous year.
Do you feel
and we've learned all of this from scratch because no one in the design team, in the marketing team, in the content production team came from the watch industry. No one. So we had to learn from scratch how to take photos of watches. Just a simple photo of watch is extremely difficult, as you may know. Very difficult.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's like lighting a teapot. It really is.
Exactly.
I obviously have my own little system here, and I see people that are doing it way differently, but I'm not a media outlet that sells watches. I don't get monetized off the content that I produce. I'm out here as an enthusiast, a passionate enthusiast. You bring up something really interesting. You talked about the international market, international sales. Do you generally think that people are buying Raketa not only just for the story, but the aesthetics and the engineering? But have you noticed that the reasons why people buy Raketa are different, for different regions of the world?
Well, a lot of people, when I exhibit in these international watch exhibitions, a lot of people say, thank you very much for continuing producing watches in your manufacture in St. Petersburg, because the watchmaking world would be much, sadder without, much more boring without Russian watches. If every single watch was just Swiss, it would be very, very boring. So thank God you have English watchmakers, German watchmakers, Japanese brands, Russian brands, because every country, every watch is based on traditions, legacy, culture, mentalities. And obviously, since we make Russian watches, this obviously has it translates into the design, the storytelling, the way they make the mechanical movements, the way they decorate the mechanical movements. And it just makes the watchmaking world so richer. So people really like that. And the watches are all about emotions. Very few people now buy watches just as a time measuring instrument. And people like Raketa for many different reasons. First of all, they kind of appreciate that the mechanical movement is very different from what you get in Switzerland, like ETA movement, for example. It looks different, it's decorated differently. The functions are different, like the counterclockwise function. Some other people just like the design, which is really quirky. Other people like, and so on, or the storytelling. They like, when we do watches for astronauts, cosmonauts, people know that Russian cosmonauts actually really wear them. So it makes the brand is really authentic. You see what I mean? When we say that we make watches for cosmonauts, they are really made for cosmonauts. When we say we make watches for, and so on, we don't lie about the origin of the brand. It's really made in Russia. We don't lie about the mechanical movement. It's really our own mechanical movement. We don't lie about the storytelling of the watch, the purpose of the watch, the design of the watch. It's really a 360-degree marketing, which makes the brand very authentic. And that's what I think people really appreciate in Raketa, because it's a very small niche brand, very different. We stand out from the big crowds a lot because we're very, very different, very quirky, but very authentic. And that's why we kept the manufacturer alive. Otherwise, we would have lost this authenticity.
Do you feel that, navigating like the global luxury market, that like, made in Russia, like means something?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who knows about watches knows that Russia has a strong legitimacy in watchmaking, I think. So it's not like out of the blue we made a Belgian watch, for example. You see, Belgium has no legitimacy in watchmaking, or like that would be a bit strange. In our case, people know that there is a history of watchmaking, so they're not surprised. And we've been around. We've been gradually building up our marketing, our communication over the past 10 years. So people have gradually heard of us, and I very much believe in organic growth. We don't have the budgets as these big brands, to buy billboards and to buy articles in, these big media corporations and so on. So the way we do our marketing is very much, actually, it's the best marketing is the one that you can't buy. It's just word of mouth marketing. You see what I mean? And totally. in the case of Raketa, it really, really works. Our best ambassadors are people who wear our watches and say, listen to their colleagues, to their friends, to their family. Look at our watch; it looks completely different. Look at the design. Look at the storytelling. And someone who wears a Raketa watch can actually talk about his watch for at least 5 minutes. Really, there's so much to say about. We have a very small collection. We have, I think, one of the smallest collections of models in the market. We have like 12 active models. That's it. But every model has a very strong storytelling, very strong design, very strong decoration, and there's so much to tell. That's the way I see our growth is very step by step, word by kind of very organic growth.
Something that maybe or has or hasn't happened, but obviously you're taking a storied manufacturer modernizing it and kind of revitalizing it in the sense, there's tons of vintage Raketa watches out there everywhere, you know. I'm curious if you've gotten to see the reaction in real time, from maybe, somebody, a watchmaker at your manufacturer, or maybe a customer who, has only worn a Raketa watch for as long as they live. And then, seeing what you're doing now with the brand just, inspires them, or, creates a new sense of glory for them,
Are you talking about foreigners or Russians?
Either.
Either.
I mean,
well, no, once again, I just came back from Dubai. In November, there was this big Dubai watch exhibition, and a lot of locals came up to me and said, "Hey, I was given a Soviet Raketa watch by my father, and I like it so much, and was so curious to see what you do, and it's really great." And they won't necessarily buy one of our modern watches because they think that what they have is really cool, and I'm perfectly fine with that, But people are very curious, and you're perfectly right. There are a lot of Raketa watches from the old timers, and so the brand is relatively well known amongst quite a few people. So it makes people very curious to see what we do now, and they really appreciate that we kept the link with the past. It's not, when you look at our modern watches and the Soviet watches, you see the link. It's not like we decided to do new brands. There is this legitimacy from the past, which I think is very important, and which I think most people really appreciate. And in terms of, and people, are very happy, as I said, that the manufacturer hasn't closed and that it still exists. The movement is still produced, and I think it's really great in terms of it brings a lot of it makes, as I said, the world of watches more interesting.
Where do you want the modern Raketa brand to kind of sit in those enthusiasts' minds? Not necessarily whether it be like a tool watch or design object or like a cultural artifact or just something that you didn't even list.
Everyone says, since you have a manufacturer, why don't you do tourbillon watches, for example? And I say, tourbillon is not a Russian thing. Tourbillon is a very fragile, complicated complication, and that's really a Swiss thing. The Russian thing is more robust, more. So we will not go into this direction, very difficult complications. Actually, we will not even necessarily go into the direction of complications at all. For the moment, we only have two complications. It's a 24 hours and counterclockwise, because they fit in our storytelling. But we will not do a complication for the sake of doing a complication, just to prove that, hey, we can do things. Many brands, they do complications because they buy the base movements and they have to prove that they also do something. So they just add on top a layer of complication.
Modules, yeah.
We don't have to do that because we do the base movement, and the base movement is so much more difficult than any kind of complication that you add on top. The escapement, just giving the right time, is so difficult. So we would not necessarily go into the direction of difficult complications. We will keep the legitimacy in terms of design with the past. That, I think, is very important. And in the past, they produce, as I said, more than 6 million watches a year. So we have an archive of designs that will keep us going for the next 50 years. There are so many incredible, for example, I won't even tell you because we're working on so many different designs at the moment. But basically, we have a lot of, in terms of design. Like, we will never do a watch, for example, linked to golf. Golf, like Audemars Piguet. Why? Because it's not a Russian thing. It's not a Russian sport. So what we will continue doing is always tell Russian storytelling. And we have enough material to keep us going for 100 years. Russia, and everyone knows about it, has done incredible achievements in science, in art, in ballet, in science, in space, in under the sea, in basically in every single direction, every single field. Russia did incredible things. So we can we can connect to all of that. And also, we will not go into expensive watches because one of the reasons why Raketa watches are, affordable is because we produce in Russia. The cost of producing in Russia is way lower than in Switzerland because obviously salaries in Switzerland are the most expensive in the world, I think. So people appreciate that you can buy a manufactured watch with strong design, strong storytelling at a very reasonable price point, and we will try to keep it that way. I mean, obviously prices do go up because there is inflation worldwide and so on, but it'll always be reasonable.
What would you say the next 5-year strategy for, the brand is? But, you alluded to you just talked about complications not on your roadmap. What about new, more output or you talked about using modules, you didn't seem like you're interested in that, but maybe new movement design or, just this deeper design integration and deeper cultural integration with Russia. What makes the next 5 years look exciting for you?
For example, in our collection now, we don't have a watch for astronauts because we discontinued the last model a year and a half ago. And for the past 2 years, we've been working on a new design that will come out early next year, hopefully. That's a big model, really cool design for astronauts. In the archives, as a manufacturer, there's a really cool model with a Geiger counter, a counter that measures the level of radioactivity, and the watch is really quirky, like the design of the case. I would love to reproduce it, and I really want to do it. There are so many things that we can do. In my office at the factory, I have all of the old archives. Today, all of our designers, they design on computer. Back in the past, they designed using watercolor. So I have these, more than I have 300 watercolors of different designs. And sometimes I just look at them and I say, wow, this is so cool, this is so cool, this is so cool.
That's insane.
My biggest problem is to decide what to do. I mean, we have such a huge choice in terms of designs, in terms of storytelling. There's so much we don't have any lack of ideas. The biggest difficulty is to choose which ones to do.
Yeah, well, that's a great place to be in. Obviously, as a business owner, you have to keep the manufacturer doors open. And I promise, I'm sure you're ready to get to dinner with your wife. This is just the last couple questions here. How do you as a business owner measure success, outside of, units sold or brand awareness or what is it for you that you say, hey, okay, cool, we're on the right track? How do you measure that?
I come from a world where the standard of success was always measured by money.
Yeah.
It took me a few years to understand that watches is not about money. I would have been much richer if I stayed, a U.S. corporate lawyer, working for a U.S. corporate law firm. So watchmaking is definitely not about money, and everyone will say that to you in Switzerland, I think. Watch is about something else. Watch is something that's terribly interesting. I mean, when I get up I had so many good reasons to shut down the whole thing. What kept me going was just this passion of when I get up in the morning, instead of being depressed by all the problems that I encounter every single day in the manufacture and in watches in general, because it's difficult. It's difficult. What keeps me going is just it's incredibly interesting. We deal with culture, design, history, craftsmanship. It's just incredibly interesting, and that's my measure of success now. We're very proud that we modernized the manufacture, not in the sense of new machines, but we just made it. It works. It doesn't lose money. We hire new people. People don't, leave us. people are enthusiastic to learn a new skill, to produce incredible watches. So that's an incredible achievement in itself, incredible achievements, and that makes me really proud. Then there's something else that we can be really proud of, is that, as I said, when we started 12 years ago, no one would have put a dime in Russian watches. Today, Russian watches are very legitimate in the worldwide watch industry. We sell all over the world. That's an incredible achievement, by the way, incredible, because but it's certainly not about money. It's not about money. It's about other things that maybe it taught me that money is not the most important thing in the world. And I really insist on that because I come from a world where everything was based on money. But Raketa and any watch brand and watch manufacturer is so much more than that. And the success and the level, the measure of success is the standards of success are completely different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, you're talking about 64 years. I think it's 64 years of 1961. What do you hope, another 64 years or maybe even another 150 years down the road? I know it's hard for you as a logical business owner to think about that, but how do you preserve a brand that's already been preserved as you acquired it?
Well, what's difficult is every model that you launch has to make people, has to bring emotions to people, and that's quite difficult, because it's not just the design; it's also the storytelling, it's the content, communication, marketing. Watches are about emotions, so you have to give emotions to people. People don't buy watches to read the time really anymore. So you have to keep that emotion alive, and every time you have to, whilst being, true to the past, you always have to surprise people with something new to bring new emotions, and that's one of the challenging things. You see what I mean? Every model has to bring a lot of emotions to the community, and that's quite challenging, by the way. So I would say, our ambition is not to become like Rolex. Obviously, we still produce 7,000 watches a year. The reason we produce so few watches is because having your own manufacturer is, on the one hand, an incredible marketing tool. You see, on the other hand, it's a huge bottleneck, because if I need more watches, I cannot produce more watches. So we increase our production capacity by maybe 10% every year, but we can't do more than that, because that would require hiring new people, training new people, buying more machines, which we can't, and so on and so on. We will never produce 1 million watches like Rolex a year. So
sure.
The ambition, within the next few years, is to gradually ramp up the production without affecting the quality, because one of the biggest enemies in watchmaking is to put. I could very well say to my manufacturers, I want you to produce 2 times more watches tomorrow, next year, but it will be to the detriment of quality. So you have to find this right balance between increasing the production without affecting the quality. So once again, the strategy is very step-by-step, organic, slow growth, and obviously opening new markets. The fact that we don't have enough watches prevents us from opening the Asian market, for example. There's strong demand for Raketa in Asia, in China, but we just can't. We don't have enough watches. All the 7,000 watches that we produce are completely sold between our 3 existing markets. It's Russia, Europe, and the Middle East. And obviously we sell in the US, we sell in all the rest of the world through internet, but we don't have any points of sale. And the reason for that is just we don't have enough watches. The demand is higher than what we can produce. So that's one of the challenges for the next 10, 20 years, is to gradually increase the production. But that's difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine. David, I want to thank you so much for spending so much of your time with us, like just learning about the journey that you've been on, the brand. Obviously we're going to link the, Raketa here in the show notes, obviously for everybody listening who's made it this far, I would highly encourage you to go check out Raketa. It didn't take me very long to realize that, you have something special, and you're doing something special, and you have a very special product, and to see the, passion, that's something that kind of stuck out to me. That lives with you, reviving this brand that, you didn't found, but, I can see that the passion is there for you, which is what sticks out. So,
thanks a lot.
I think that's a great place to leave you, and I'm sure you're ready to get to dinner with the wife. So.
Nice, and I would love to come and visit you in Las Vegas.
Please.
I've never been there. Never.
Yeah. And next time you're here, I will certainly show you the city and show you everything we have to offer. That'd be amazing. So I think people know that, like, I'm the watch guy of Vegas. So I think, but no, it's a cool city. It's a great market to be in, and yeah, I just love being here. So
cool. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I'm glad we were able to finally get this scheduled, and I'm certainly gonna follow up with you here very soon, of course. So
okay, let's keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.